Hey, Katie. We have the Whispering Statue. We are on Chapter 7, 4 Spies. For a moment, Mr. Basswood stared in amazement at Nancy. Then his look of surprise vanished, and he asked,
"Where have you worked before?"
"Oh, no place, but I go to art school, and I do know a good bit about paintings."
"And how about statuary?"
the shop owner asked. "Very little," Nancy admitted. "But if you have a catalog, I could study it." Mr. Atkin had walked up. He had overheard the conversation, and now looked even more unpleasant than he had before. He said nothing, however. Mr. Basswood asked Nancy,
"What do you know about rare books?"
"Not much," she said, then gave him a broad smile. "But I did manage to sell a book and a painting."
"Yes, you did,"
Mr. Basswood admitted.
"Furthermore, I've been thinking about what the stout lady said. That salesmen make her nervous. She prefers woman clerks."
"I'm sure I could do the job," Nancy told him. The shop owner thought over the proposition for a full 15 seconds, then said,
"All right, I'll give you a chance. But remember, I'm not making any promise to keep you, and I'll pay you only the minimum wage rate."
Nancy was fearful that he might ask her for a social security number or other type of identification, but he said nothing about it, and she bubbled eagerly, "How soon may I start?"
"You may come in tomorrow," Mr. Basswood replied. "Your hours will be from 10 to 12 and 2 to 4.
"Oh, thank you. Thanks very much," she said, and Nancy and the girls hurried off. It was not until they were 2 blocks away from the art shop that the 3 friends burst into laughter. George remarked, "Debbie Lynbrook, you certainly put that one over. You'd better be a good salesgirl if you hope to stay at the shop and do any sleuthing." Bess suddenly sobered. "At first I thought all this was funny, but now I'm afraid you're headed for trouble." "I hope not," the young detective replied. "But it's my only chance to find out what's happening to Mrs. Merriam's rare book collection." As the girls strolled along, George said, "Will you excuse me for a little while? I have an errand to do. I'll meet you 2 at the nice soda shop over on that corner." She went down a side street, and Bess said, "I wonder what she's coming up with now." Nancy and Bess went into the sweet shop to idle away the time. They purchased magazines, a newspaper, and salted peanuts. Then they sat down at the counter to order lunch. George came in. She said nothing about her errand, and Nancy and Bess were a bit curious, because George was not usually secretive. She ordered a soda and a sandwich. As soon as the girls had finished, they headed for the bus station, where they had been told there was usually a taxi. It was not until the 3 were seated in the taxi that George divulged where she had gone. She took a small package from her purse and put it into Nancy's lap. "This should help keep you in disguise," she whispered. Curious, Nancy opened the package. Inside was a stack of calling cards which had been printed Miss Debbie Lynbrook. So usually back in the day, calling cards were like if you go to visit someone, you could leave them a card with your name and I believe contact information so they could reciprocate and they know who came back. "How clever," Nancy said. "Indeed, they'll be a big help." Her eyes twinkled. "Tomorrow morning I shall leave one on the table near Mr. Basswood's office." When the girls reached the yacht club, Bess found a note in her mailbox saying she was to telephone her home at once. She went off to make the call, but returned in a few minutes. "Is everything all right?" George asked her. Bess replied that she was not sure. "Mother said that Mrs. Gruen phoned and asked her to get this message to Nancy. Some man who refused to give his name called your house several times, demanding to talk to you or be told where to find you. Hannah decided not to call you direct." "He wouldn't give his name?" George asked. "No, and this worried Hannah. She requested him to give her a number that Nancy could call, but he refused." Bess said the man had been so persistent that Hannah finally had become angry and told them that if he would not give his name, he should never call again. "Oh, Nancy, I'm worried too," Bess added. "Your enemies are determined to find you." Nancy was silent for several seconds. Then she smiled slightly. "Do you realize, girls, that this means they don't know where I am, or that I'm Debbie Lynbrook?" Hearing this, Bess and George relaxed, but advised Nancy to be on the alert for trouble. "Especially when you're at work," George added. That evening, Nancy telephoned her father. He was amazed to hear about the discovery of the statue and said he would have an expert from New York examine it.
"It will be interesting to find out whether or not your suspicions about it are correct," the lawyer said.
Nancy then told her father of her job at Basswood's art and bookshop. He laughed and wished her luck, but he warned her not to take any chances on the owner discovering she was Nancy Drew. His daughter chuckled. "Debbie will do her best." The following morning, Bess and George wished the young detective luck. They promised to drop into the shop later to see how she was getting along. "Let's have lunch in town," Nancy suggested. "I have 2 hours off." During the morning, Nancy made 3 very good sales, and Mr. Basswood seemed pleased. His assistant, who never changed his expression, kept a sharp eye on her. She began to wonder whether perhaps it was Mrs. Atkin and not Mr. Basswood who might be guilty of falsifying Mrs. Merriam's account. About 11 o'clock a young man came in, signed the register, and went straight to the book section. Nancy was waiting on a woman interested in paintings, and for a few minutes no one was in the book department. While Nancy's customer was trying to make up her mind about an old English landscape, the girl detective saw the young man slip a book into his pocket. "He means to steal it," she told herself, "and that's a rare volume." Excusing herself to the woman, Nancy hurried to the entrance hall where Mr. Atkin was standing. She whispered her suspicions to him, but he told her he could do nothing.
"If you're wrong, Mr. Basswood could be sued."
He turned away. Nancy was not satisfied. She decided to do something else. She walked casually to the register to get the name of the young man and found it was Sam Payne. She wrote on the card, "I saw Mr. Sam Payne put an early edition of Browning's poems into his pocket." So that'd be Emily Browning. She looked around for Mr. Basswood, but he was not in sight, so she went back to her customer. "I know I'm taking a long time," the woman said, "but after all, when one spends this much money, one should be absolutely sure." Just then the front door opened, and to Nancy's delight she saw a police officer come in. She hurried over to him and put the card into his hand. She whispered, "Mr. Atkin won't do anything about it." The police officer walked toward Mr. Payne. Upon seeing him, the young man made a beeline for the front door.
So he's just going right for the door.
He opened it and hurried outside. The officer followed. Mr. Payne did not get far. The policeman stopped him and said something which Nancy, who was standing in the doorway, did not hear. Mr. Atkin was also watching the scene. The young man pulled the stolen volume from his pocket and handed it to the policeman.
"I was only holding it until I made up my mind."
Nancy doubted this was true and wondered what was going through Mr. Atkins's mind. He made no comment when the policeman handed the book to him. The frozen expression on Mr. Atkins's face remained as the officer said,
"You can thank this young lady for retrieving that rare volume for you. Do you want to prefer a charge against this young man? So press charges." "Mr. Basswood will have to do that,"
Atkin replied. He made no further comment and marched back to the shelf to return the book to its place. The officer looked amazed, but merely shrugged and shook his head. He gave Nancy a big smile as he went off with the suspect. She returned to her customer and sold a painting. At lunch, Nancy told Bess and George what had happened. The cousins exchanged glances and Bess said, "I was so worried about you that I asked that policeman to drop in." "Good thing you did," said Nancy. During the afternoon, she made several sales to summer visitors in Waterford. To her chagrin, Mr. Basswood told her at 4 o'clock that she was not to report to work the following morning, so she's upset about that. But she was relieved when he added that she should come in at 2 o'clock. In talking this over later with the girls, Nancy remarked, "I think something fishy will be going on at the shop tomorrow morning. Let's get Dick and go down there this evening. Maybe we can spy on the place and learn something." Dick was delighted with the idea and drove the girls downtown in his small car. Nancy had decided to take him into her confidence without revealing her identity, and said that certain things happening at the shop made her wonder if the business was being carried on honestly. The good-looking young man grinned.
"I've never tried solving a mystery, but it sounds like fun."
He parked a car some distance from the shop and suggested they approach it Basswoods from the rear along a driveway. As they neared the building, Bess whispered, "I see a light in the basement window." The young people tiptoed forward. They could hear men talking. As they drew closer, Nancy recognized the voices as those of Mr. Basswood and Mr. Atkin. Reaching the lighted window, the four spies found it wide open. They could see the two men clearly. They were packing books in cartons. Dick hunkered down and stared intently at the scene below.
Mr. Atkins spoke up. "It's a good thing you're getting rid of this Merriam collection out of here. I don't trust that Linwood girl."
The remark made Bess shiver. She was sure Nancy would be in danger if she went back to work at the shop. Just then, the young people heard a car. They did not want to be caught spying. The girls started to move away, but Dick, startled by the automobile, suddenly lost his balance and tumbled into the cellar of the art shop. Uh-oh. I'll have to see what happens.